Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Love Her podcast.
Yes, welcome back, everyone. We are so excited that you are here for yet another week. This is now episode 4 going on Love Her, and we are so excited for you guys to be back here with us joining the conversation.
Yeah, we know this format is a little bit different than what we usually do, but Naya and I have mentioned before that we're in different cities. So we're making this work. We're bringing out the content for you guys, and we're so happy to have another episode.
Yeah, we really are just figuring this out. We definitely want to continue doing it this way, that way, and having different forms of the podcast. We actually mentioned earlier we enjoy being in the same space because there's nothing like the energy of us being in the same room, but we're definitely going to try to make it work and continue on these great conversations for all of you guys.
Yeah, and Naya and I are always saying, like, when we're in person, we can kind of just vibe the energy. But now we're
Yeah.
like, okay, what do we do?
Yeah. It's so weird. Yeah, but we'll make it work and it's still going to be a great episode. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. So this week we are actually going to talk about our stories. We realized that we needed to kind of have a series for you guys. And this first half of all of these episodes that we have been putting out have been our reason why, the journey we've been on as far as healing and more of our stories. And we do want to then shift into your stories and bringing people on and sharing it with other women all over the world from all different walks of life. But as of right now, we do want to dive into our stories. And today we are going to do Janessa's.
Yes, I feel like we talk a lot about our healing journeys and this path that we're on. And it would kind of be weird of us to not explain our own journeys and how we've gotten to where we are. So
Yeah.
I'm super excited to share. And I know Naya is too. It's, of course, a
Mhm.
vulnerable journey. So bear with
Yes.
us. But
Yes.
yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, very excited. Now, in the first episode, we mentioned that we both have kind of been on very interesting paths, that our lives have been kind of parallel, but they've been so different. And you'll hear more about that in these episodes. This first episode, like I said, will be Janessa's, and then the next one will be mine. But I do want to preface this by saying that although our stories are very different, we have kind of found that both of our journeys have brought us here together today, and we are so appreciative to continue being here. And although what we might get into the nitty gritty of it all, we don't want to take away from the peace that this podcast always brings. And we hope that you guys will find that in hearing our stories and knowing that we have all been on our own separate journeys and that none of us are in this alone.
Yeah, and I think no matter how different someone's life is, you can always take bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Everyone's life is so different, but I have friends that we've walked completely different roads, but there's so much that we have in common. And
Hmm.
so feel free to take my story, take any parts of it. And I hope that some of you guys relate to it and relate to the finding the joy in the difficulty at times.
So, with that being said, here we go. Janessa, tell me before we get into the nitty gritty, what is one thing that you loved about your childhood?
I think something that I loved about my childhood and honestly, if even into teenhood was I always had some of the best friends around. Truly, like my friendships in this lifetime have been so premier. I remember being 5 years old and listen, my social calendar was stacked. It was sleepovers, birthday parties, like it really was though. Like I had
Mhm.
incredible friends that I would go on vacation with and I would go camping with. And it was always just a way for me to constantly have fun. Like one of my neighbors taught me to ride a bike for the first time. And I just had that community of other younger people my age. And I feel like that was so important for me to kind of just escape and really just have that fun.
Yeah, okay. I'm getting so emotional already. This is gonna be okay. So I have to say to you guys, although Janessa and I are cousins, we we have been strangers for our whole lives. I'm gonna need tissue.
Mackenzie,
We
bring the
have
tissues.
I know, she's not even here right now. No, like, seriously, I'm gonna need tissue. Hold on. Like we said in previous episodes, Janessa and I, although were cousins, we have been strangers almost our whole life, right? And this podcast and this journey we've been on has made us closer. I sometimes forget that we are strangers, and my emotions are coming from the fact that there goes that parallel of
Yeah.
although, you might have been in rough periods, you also had your friends to lean on and had so many great people that helped raise you, so I find that so beautiful and it makes me so emotional. I won't get into my story, but there's definitely a parallel in that, and that makes me so emotional and makes me so happy for you that you had that, so thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I feel like we've always unknowingly at the same time had the mentality that friends are family.
Yeah.
Because I think when your family situation is chaotic, you have to lean on your friends even as a little girl. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember going to my friend's house and just kind of seeing how their life would work with them and their siblings running around and their parents together, just living a normal life. And I know that no one has a normal life, but like my life really wasn't freaking normal. Okay. So I would go over there and be like, wow, this is amazing.
So, when you say that your life wasn't normal, we're going to have to go into that. When you say your life isn't normal, people might think many, many things, right? Because we all have different backgrounds, we all have different walks of life. But Janessa truly has a story that, like, not many people can relate to. Like, our life coach says to us all the time, what is her percentage?
She said 90% of the things that people go through is something that I have been through. And when I first met with her, she's like, "Your situation is the 10%."
So we say that to say that truly when she says her situation is so not normal that you guys are it's gonna blow your socks off. So I'd like for you to kind of give a summary of how it started, how it is now, and I'm just gonna give you the floor.
Yeah, so I grew up with two brothers, Isaiah, who was a year and a half younger than me, and then Avery, who was 5.5 years younger than me. They were both diagnosed with a genetic condition called mitochondrial disease, which basically just means that their whole bodies were extremely weak. At around age 2, they had essentially the bodies of an 80-year-old. And so they were both wheelchair bound, they couldn't talk, they were both deaf. Really, the only thing that they could do is see, but they still had so much personality within them. My youngest brother, Avery, he was the sickest of the 2. I mentioned in the last episode that he lived to be about 10 years old, and he was in the hospital over 100 times. So, with that, my home was just very chaotic. I had nurses living with us 24/7. There was always an ambulance being called. I mean, the amount of times I'd come home from school and an ambulance would be there was just it was, like, so frequent that I had just become used to the chaos. And on top of that, my parents both work full-time jobs, so our life was just manic. There was no peace, it was really chaotic, and it was no one's fault, it was just the situation. And so I always grew up with the chaos, but then there was the underlying fear too, because I knew that my brothers were gonna die. And
Mhm.
so you wake up every day for 20 something years and you don't know if that's gonna be the day that your brother dies. And that takes a toll on you. I mean, that is growing up and you have no control over anything in your life, really.
Mhm.
So, my brother Avery passed away when I was 15. I was a freshman in high school. And his was pretty expected. We had seen it coming, but it was a big moment for me because, of course, the big loss that I had been waiting for my whole life was finally there. And
Mhm.
Avery was like my buddy. Like, I remember him being born and I would dress him up in Build-A-Bear clothes because he was so little. Like, he was my best friend. I would walk in the room and he would just like burst out laughing because we had that connection, you know?
Mhm.
So losing him was very difficult, but it also was kind of a pillar of my own strength at the same time because it was like, "Okay, I know how I handle loss now. I know what
Yeah.
it looks like now."
Mhm.
And then my other brother, Isaiah, he had the same disease, but he had always actually been pretty healthy. He never really was in the hospital, didn't have much issues. And then my junior year of college, one day I was hanging out in my dorm and I got a call from my parents and they were like screaming, just saying he died. And
Mhm.
I thought they were talking about our dog. And I was like, what? Like, literally. And they were like, "No, Isaiah died." And that one was a lot because it was such an unexpected loss.
Mm, mm,
So I've spent that was about 3 years ago. So the last 3 years have been processing what it means to now not be anyone's sister. You know,
yeah,
I'm now an only child, even though I grew up and I had 2 siblings, and I didn't get all of the attention. If anything, I got less because they were sick.
mhm,
Um, so that's kind of when my true healing journey started, is when after Isaiah died, I needed to learn how to cope with the feelings because it was just a lot of emotion.
okay, okay. So I want to back up a little bit because I just keep seeing you as a little girl walking into the home and never knowing what to expect when you walked into the home after school. So I'm curious to know what you did in that time, knowing that there was all of this chaos going on. What, like, walk me through what that little girl did.
I mean, there was anxiety every single day of my life. There was not a
Right.
day that I didn't come home and there wasn't a feeling of dread. And I would instantly know, like, I would just have a gut feeling if I knew that something had happened to Avery. So I'd
Mm,
walk in, I would just see one car there, which would just be the nurses, and I would look into where my brothers were, and I would see that it was just Isaiah. And I said, "Oh, is Avery in the hospital? Is he okay?" And the nurses would kind of give me the rundown. And then I'd just go to my room and I'd sit alone for hours. I spend so much time alone thinking. I
yeah.
would be 8 years old in a room by myself with headphones just listening to music and thinking because that was my escape, was thinking about the future and the family that I could have someday was
Yeah.
the only way I could survive my childhood. And
Yeah.
it's kind of sad that I spent so much of my childhood wishing it away, but in hindsight, I couldn't have survived it any other way. It was just no one
Mhm.
can handle that much stress day to day, especially not in a little kid's body.
Yeah, yeah, that is such high stress, especially walking into that every single day, you know? And I can only imagine how you all felt walking into a situation that nobody can control. Obviously, the boys couldn't control, your parents couldn't control, you couldn't. It was like, what do we do but find ways to cope and make this feel better and feel lighter, you know?
Yeah. I
So I
think
can
also there was a part of me that as I grew older, I never really wanted to face the situation for what it was.
mm,
Um, so that's where that mental escape comes from because I was almost embarrassed that that was what my brothers were like. And just because it's so not a normal situation. And let's be honest, kids are judgmental. You go to school, and if you're not the same as everyone else, they do target you. That's just how kids are naturally. And so
mhm.
I had to have that mental escape of not really seeing the situation for what it was in order for me to manage the stress every day.
So how did the kids at school know what was going on at home? Was it something you talked about? What it like, tell me about that.
So, when I was really little, like 5 or 6, I didn't know that it was not normal to have special needs brothers, so I would just kinda be
Mhm,
like and I remember being in 1st grade and I'd just say, "Oh, yeah, Avery went to the hospital last night," and my teacher's like, "Is he good?" And I'm like,
mhm,
Yeah," just because that's as a kid, that's what I was used to. And I remember distinctly being 7 years old and realizing, "Oh, that's not normal," based on
mhm.
other people's reactions, specifically adults' reactions.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't tell any of my peers at school unless we were friends and they had to come to my house. There were a few instances where one of my teachers would know my parents, or one of my parents would tell my teachers, and it kind of felt like a violation for me because I was really afraid of people feeling bad for me. Like, I hated the feeling of pity. If I'm being honest, I
Mhm.
still do.
Yeah.
So, that was the reason why I just felt like I didn't want anyone to know.
Yeah, and I being an outsider looking in, I see that in you, like, you won't really talk about your problems or things you're going through and whatever, and I'm an open book. I'm like, "Yeah, today was a shit day," like, da, 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 and whatever, and you kinda just move, like, you just kinda keep moving, and that kind of shows in what you've been used to doing your whole life.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how that comes out still in your present day because you're so used to kind of having to find ways to cope and you've never been one to think like I get a positive reaction in sharing so much of my life and what's been going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also part of it too, which I know that a lot of people can relate to, is growing up, I felt like me showing any kind of emotion was a burden because there was
Mm.
so much going on. So, as a little kid, I really started to internalize everything and become very inward because it felt like anytime I had shared an emotion that I was upset about something, it kind of just made the situation more difficult for everyone around me. So it was better for me to just be quiet and not make waves than it was for me to make a big deal of everything.
Yeah. And I feel like as a kid, it is not like you said, like this, obviously, none of this is something that people normally go through. But as a kid, to have to expect grieving or expect death in your life nearly every single day is not something a kid ever has to go through. Um, Really, a majority of the time, like, a kid loses their grandmother, and that's the end of the world, but never mind somebody that you consider your very best friend. Every single day, you are worried about losing that person. Um, so I'm curious to know how you want to kinda share navigating grief for kids. How would you bring that about to your kids or anybody who might be in a similar situation as you? How would you have wanted somebody to address that with you?
That's a good question. I think that grief with kids is complicated, but at the same time, it's a little bit simple because kids understand a lot more than we think that they do.
Mhm.
And kids are also a lot more open to love.
Yeah.
So, I was able to love my brother Avery so fiercely and not fear about his death because of the fact that I was a child.
Mhm.
I didn't distance myself from him. I just loved him for as he was, and I was just thinking about the day and the day only because I was a
Mhm.
kid and I just love my brother. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's something that I have learned, and it doesn't matter if you're a kid, it doesn't matter if you're an adult. In
Yeah.
each time that my brothers have died, when Avery died in 2016 and then Isaiah died in 2021, I realized that each time instantaneously I was a different person. And
Yeah.
I not only had to grieve the loss of my brother, but I had to get to know the new version of myself.
Okay. Okay.
Which means that when someone close to you dies, you experience something that is so wildly painful and traumatic, especially when you see them pass, the moments leading up to it, the moments right after it. It's so instantaneously traumatic that it will always change you as a person, even as a
Mm.
kid.
Mhm.
And so I would say to any parent professional that's trying to help a kid is understanding that they will be different after.
Mhm. Mhm.
and letting them know that it is okay that they'll be different because they
Yeah.
now know what real loss is and they now see what death means.
Right. So explain to me what differences you notice in yourself. Because when I hear that, I'll be honest, I'm not somebody who really has experienced grief. I know I'm so fortunate in saying that, and people that it's just a part of life. It's all something that we experience. Me being somebody that hasn't walked in your shoes or experienced grief in the way that you have, I don't really know that I understand the different person part. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so an analogy that I like to use is let's just say you drive to work every single day, same route, and one day you drive and you get into a really bad car accident.
Right.
Every time that you drive that route from that day forward, you're going to think of that car accident.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So, what I mean is that once you lose someone close to you, your identity changes first and foremost because when I lost my brothers, I was no longer a sister. I was an
Yeah.
only child. So
Yeah.
your identity inherently shifts. The next thing
Mhm.
is I now know what it feels like and what the experience is of seeing my brother walk out of the hospital for the last time, seeing my brother take his last breath. That is stored in my long-term memory now. I
Yeah.
carry that. So I am now someone that understands the depths of loss and pain, and I can never look at a bad day the same. I just can't.
Yeah.
Now if
Yeah.
I stub my toe or something, all the bad things happen, I'll never see it as a bad day because I know in my book of life what the bad days have been.
Yeah, that's like one of the worst days of your life you've experienced in within the first 20 years of your life, some of the worst days. So you're like, it can't get much worse,
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
losing somebody that you love so dearly. So true. Wow. Wow. Hearing your story is so humbling. It is a humbling story, girl.
Listen, it humbles me. Like, I actually feel like my life is 2 lives, okay? Because there was the
Mhm.
life where I was living in a hospital basically, where it was chaotic and my brothers were at home and the nurses were there. That was like part 1 of my life. And then after, when my brothers were no longer there, when the home was silent, now that I'm living on my own, it literally feels like part 2. So it is also humbling for me because I'm like, I'm really complaining about today when that was my life 10 years ago? Like, no.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as an outsider looking in and being your cousin who lived hundreds of miles away, I had no idea that this was going on a regular. So, I want to kind of share what my perspective looking into your life or hearing about your life was. I remember being younger, right? And seeing your brothers all the time, and I knew obviously that they had mitochondrial disease, and I would just tell people, "Yeah, I have these 2 cousins that have mitochondrial disease," and the only thing they can really do is smile because your brothers had the biggest
They had the
smiles.
biggest smiles.
Yes,
Yes.
and, they would light up a room. Also, Isaiah would roll everywhere.
And he would
He would
pull out
roll.
hair too.
He would pull out hair and he would roll, and, I just remember being in your house and your mom being like, "He's under the couch again." 'Cause, I remember those silly moments and those happy moments because I was obviously never there in the physical when you were coming home every day, when you were seeing the ambulance in front of your house, so to hear the walk that you took in this is so interesting to me because I saw your life so differently. And I think your parents, I know that obviously you had a different perspective of it, but they did a good job at bringing light to the stories that happened from my side when they would talk about them.
Yeah, I think it's also though when you're talking to other people who aren't living it, you don't wanna share the pain of it,
Too
and you
much.
also
Yeah.
don't want to admit the pain of it, but
Yeah.
living in that house, I can tell you that everyone was battling their own pain, and there was not a day that was not filled with grief on the inside. And
Mm.
I think that everyone did the best that they could, but in hindsight, I wish there was a little bit more room for me to say, "Why me?"
Mm.
I w Because there was never that opportunity, or not that there wasn't the opportunity, but no one else was saying it, so I just shoved all of my feelings down, and it made it so that later on I had to unpack them.
So it
Um
was a lot of avoiding of the emotions that were going on and so much of trying to like, we're okay, we're okay, we're okay. Instead of being
Yeah,
like, God, like just letting it out. Like, oh my God, like you guys should have just stood in a room together and just screamed.
but everyone was in survival,
Right.
there was no room to give ourselves that space because everyone was just operating. I had a
Yeah.
job to do, which was get my school done, be a good kid, and not really make any waves. My parents had their jobs to do, and it was operating like a machine. But then after my brothers passed away, it was like the machine had no oil left. And now we have all these broken parts, and we have to somewhat put them back together because we never really emotionally acknowledged what happened in those years.
Yeah. Because in the midst of that, there's also the typical things in life that go on. The typical arguments, the boy drama, the arguments with the mom, the dad being strict and like, where are you
Yes.
going tonight? What toy is that? Like so many regular things that are also going on in the midst of all of these. I don't want to say tragedies, but you
But
know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah.
All of these tragedies. Yeah.
I do think, though, that the normal life things, like the middle school crushes and the
Yeah.
drama, provided me actually with an escape. Like,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
started journaling when I was 10 years old, and I still have the journals that I kept from all those years. And I have a
Mhm.
solid 3 journals where I'm just talking about boy drama. Because I think that truly that was all I could focus on at that time.
Yeah, yeah, and at the same time, you were still a normal kid. Like, you were
Yeah.
still a normal girl trying to survive middle school, high school, there's just, like, going through all of these years, even though you had this life, it's so cute that you were still like, I just see your little self, like, hiding in your room and just being like, "So and so is so cute today, like, he wrote me a note and da 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 da," and, like, there's just so much going on around you. Um so that's so funny that you still found those moments because you have to, because you're still human at the
Have
end of the day.
to.
Yeah, you're still doing all of
Yeah.
these normal human things. Um, yeah, even though your life doesn't feel normal.
Yeah, and I do wanna say I did have a very safe and loving home. It was
Mhm.
just we were put in a situation that no one ever really prepares you for. But I do think that experiencing grief at such a young age has taught me so many incredible things about life. Um,
Mhm.
Especially when my brother Avery died, like I said, it really proved to me that I can have connections that are beyond this world. That Avery is
Mhm.
always sending me signs, whether it be a white butterfly, whether I'm seeing his name on a candle. And Isaiah is too. My brothers are always sending me signs from the other side.
Mhm.
So experiencing that grief has made me see death in a way as a beautiful thing because
Yeah.
death also goes with life. It does. And my brothers are no longer physically here, but they're sending me these signs.
Yeah.
And when they did leave this earth, it gave me the opportunity to step out of fight or flight because I no longer had to worry about the hospital visits. I no longer had to worry about when they were going to die and how I was going to handle it or how my parents were going to handle it. Them leaving the earth gave me an opportunity to live that I would not have if they still were here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. So now that, you've been through all that and your life has shifted so much within you said it happened 3 years ago.
Yeah.
What is it? Do you still have those moments where you wake up and it's almost like a PTSD kind of feeling where you're like, "Do I have anything I need to worry about today?" Did you have that after?
Yeah, I think that's why I struggled with control so much. When I
Okay.
was in college, I really used to structure my days by the minute. I knew what I was doing at 8:13 for the next 5 days. To a fault though, because I became addicted to routine and I
Mhm.
clung on to control so much because I had 0 control as a child.
Mm.
I also had years where I struggled with overexercise and eating because, again, I was clinging on to control. And
Mhm.
then I had this epiphany about a year ago. It was weird and random, but one day I just woke up and said, "My life doesn't need to be hard anymore. I don't
Mm.
have to overexert myself in all these areas. I don't need to control what I'm doing day to day, and it's making me miserable. I don't have to do that anymore." And there are moments where I get triggered. Like, for example, one of my friends, she lives in Boston in this area that's right by Children's Hospital, which is where Avery would go to. And there was this one gas station where I actually had to do chest PT on my brother because he stopped breathing. And every time I would go by that gas station, even though it had been 10 years later, it was traumatizing for me because it just brought me back to that moment. So I'd say it's more things that remind me of that feeling, and it's still learning how to cope with the control aspect.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm also curious to know what it was like when you started dating Luke and you told him your life story. Like, how has that been? Because I know you said when you were in school, it wasn't something that you brought up to people unless they came to your house. How did you kind of introduce that to your partner now?
So we met in January of 2021.
Okay.
And we had been hanging out basically every day since then. And, obviously when you start dating someone, you start having those deeper conversations. But really, the first time I fully opened up to him was on Avery's birthday. We were just on campus doing homework together and I was feeling sad. And usually I try not to be like on a specific date I'm going to feel sad. I feel like if I'm going to grieve, it should be whenever I feel like it, not just on that date. But on his birthday, I was sad and I was missing him. And I told Luke about it and how much Avery meant to me. And he was like, "Okay, you know what? Let's stop doing homework. Let's go pick up some ice cream and we'll just hang out and spend time together." And that was when I knew I was like, "Okay, this guy's the real deal."
Yeah.
But
Oh,
Luke is so, he's always just calm and chill. So he's never gonna be the type to have these major reactions. He's never gonna overreact to anything. And I think in my grief, I had needed that because again, I don't like pity. So I need someone that's gonna just be a calm presence. And I feel
mhm,
like him being there has healed so many parts of that. And I
mhm.
also feel like with my brothers being sick, I never really had anyone to do life alongside. And
Mhm.
obviously, Luke's not my brother, so that's not the analogy. But in some ways, it does feel like we're just doing life together in a way that you would if you had siblings growing up together. So that's
Yeah.
also been very healing.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying not to cry over here. Just hearing this is it's very beautiful. Woo! Okay. And I see that. I see the way that he brings peace into his space in general. Even when we all hang out, Luke's just kind of like, yeah, like he's kind of one of those people where it's just like it's not that deep, right? He reminds you that it's just like we can all relax. Like we
Yeah.
can all be freaking out, and Luke's just like, yeah. I'm like, okay, yeah, like we should all actually just chill.
Like sometimes I'm just like, can you make this a bigger deal? Because like he's just, yeah, so this happened today. And I'm like, and you waited all day to tell me?
But, being in the spaces that you've been in, it is such a breath of fresh air for you, I'm sure,
It is.
to have that in your life and to know that moving into parenting in your future together, that it's going to be such a different home for you and your family and your kids. And he always say, like, I cannot imagine a man yelling at me because Luke doesn't raise his voice. Like, it's so beautiful that you're able to have that, and that little child, that little Janessa, little Ness, um, manifested all of that for you, thinking of, I just see you in your room as a child, thinking of your dream family, just like you said in the beginning of this, and it's playing out in your current life, which is so beautiful and so powerful to see as an outsider looking in, that you really brought it all to fruition. Yeah.
Yeah, like, in hindsight, I did manifest that, which is
Yeah.
so beautiful because I remember being in my room 8, 9, 10 years old and really just thinking about my future family and life and
Mhm.
having that calm energy and just a level of safety there. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad that that's what my life has become, and that's what I've chosen for myself.
Yeah, it's so, so beautiful. I mean, we really within the last year, we've seen so many things come about, so much childhood trauma, generational curses, but to really in this present life to sit back and think about all of the things we've been through, to think about that little girl, think about the teenager, think about us now, and think about where we will be because of all of these things. Isn't that just so beautiful?
It is, and I think that growing up, we clung on to the future so much, and being in this present moment is amazing, and I want
Yeah.
anyone to know that if you're going through a hard time, if you're facing grief, it does get better.
Yeah.
It does get better. You will always miss the person, you will, but they are with you.
Yeah.
Love extends far beyond this physical 3D realm. They are with you, it gets better, and you can build the future that you want to.
Yeah, you so can. I mean, so I just remember the day that you and we had our first moment together. It was Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and we just sat in the bathroom and cried, and it was our first time ever realizing that we're both really struggling. I think that
Yeah.
neither one of us understood what the other person had been through because it's never anything we ever talked about. And I think our parents really did try to shield that from each other's families. Like we really didn't, and there was a part of our families that didn't want the other to know how much we were all going through. And I
Yeah,
think
like a fear of vulnerability almost.
yeah, and like I'm like, if we had those conversations, we probably would be in different like things would be a lot different. But you and I are actually having those conversations. So that moment for us was like we broke down a wall of like, we don't have to pretend that this is okay.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to pretend that we're all okay because we are all struggling because this is generations of things and karma and all of these emotions because, we don't have to go into what happened that night, but it was just a realization happened for the both of us where we were like, okay, something's got to give. Like something's got to
Yeah.
change because we shared so many stories of what was going on in my life and you shared so much of what was going on in your life. And I remember in that moment thinking, "What in the world? Like, why? Why did it have to be us? Why did this have to be our family? What?" But looking back and sitting in this chair right now, I'm actually so grateful for that, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
3 years ago, I would not have been saying that because I was so resentful, like, "What in the world?" Like, I was so angry, we were both so angry at
Yeah.
it, but because we see the other side, it's like, "Wow, who would we be without that?"
We would not be. And I also think that something growing up that I always struggled with is I felt guilty saying, "Why me?"
Mm,
I felt this responsibility that this was my life and I needed to just kind of deal with it and, gear up, go face first. But I think something that's equally as important is asking yourself, "Why me?" Is
yeah,
sitting with the anger, because if you feel the anger, but you're not feeling it and sitting in it, you're packing it away and it's coming out somewhere else in your life.
it's gonna come out.
So, it's gonna come out in your relationships, in your work, in your friendships.
Mhm.
So, sometimes you need to sit with the "why me?" Sometimes you need to say, "Why would the world bring me this situation?" Because when you sit with that, you are able to see what skills and abilities you are blessed with so that you can change the world.
Yeah, because it really we gotta bring it back to spirituality. It's so hard not
It
to.
always comes back to it.
Because we are all on a journey here. Like, we're all here for a reason. And I kind of want to bring up something really quick because I have not forgotten about this since I heard it. Last week, I watched a documentary about a very famous celebrity that is going through trial right now. They've done a lot of things, whatever. I won't get into it as not necessary. But in the interview, one of the people that were being interviewed, um, were like, they were somebody that was working alongside them very closely for years, decades. And a lot of the other interviewers wanted to shield their voice, shield their face. They didn't want to talk about it. So the interviewer asked this person that had spent a lot of time with them, "Why are you so comfortable openly sharing these things? Don't aren't you afraid in the same way that other people are?" And he just looked at the camera and said, "This life is not mine." And I was like, "Whoa." He was like, "I'm here to serve a purpose. And if my purpose is to help people and to save people, that is what I'm here to do. I have nothing to be afraid of because
Mm,
I am on this mission to do that purpose, whatever that purpose is. I was given this body to do that. It isn't mine. This isn't mine. My soul got into this body to come on this earth to do that purpose. And if this is part of that, that is what I'm here to do. And I'm okay. If I die doing that, I did it." And I was like,
mm, wow.
wow. It was
And I
so deep.
I actually think that ties well into grief and loss and forgiveness, because
Mhm.
we have to recognize that we come on this earth, our souls enter these bodies for a specific
Yeah.
purpose and mission. And in order for us to achieve these missions, we have to learn from other souls and other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we lose people in our lives, when someone wrongs us and we need to forgive, we have to remember that they were in our lives for whatever period so that we can
Right.
learn,
Mhm.
not so
Mhm.
that we can hold on to these attachments and not live our lives for the rest of our days. No, we're meant to live. That's why we're here and it's a blessing. So live
Yep.
every day to impact other people and to make this world a better place.
Yeah, it's so important that when you go through these things, and I think that's why we find it so important to share our stories because we see the value in going through all these things and finding your purpose once you realize, oh, I went through that for a reason. Like, I was that child and was sitting in that room and was handed this life and these challenges for a reason. And honestly, at the end of the day, even if it only helps one person,
That's all you need.
that's all you need. You are doing something and you are really contributing to the purpose of life, you know? Um, yeah.
And it makes me think of the movie Inside Out, where all of the core memories
Yeah.
have anxiety and sadness as well as happiness. And so, if you don't experience loss or pain or trauma, you don't understand the depths of love. It is
Yeah.
through my brother Avery and Isaiah and their losses that I realized my capacity to love. And
Mhm.
so don't be afraid to give it, to feel it, to share it, because this is why we're all here, to love and to be loved and to inspire others.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the whole reason behind this podcast, honestly.
It is.
We we're just here to inspire and hope that our stories, our journey, other people's stories, other women can all we can all come together to really bring about a drive in you, hope for you to see the other side because we know what it's like. If you are somebody listening to this and you're really struggling with what you've been through, you're struggling with issues with your parents, you're struggling with finding a good therapist, issues with your partners, like issues with friends, like we've been through, girl, if you think about it, we've been through it all. Combined,
We've been through some stuff.
combined especially, like although we're young, we have so much knowledge to share. And our only hope is that we can share it with all of you and continue to do that. Um, and that at the end of the day, we are living out our purpose, you
We
know?
are. And I hope that my story helped inspire some of you and just make you realize that life goes by so quick. I said this before, but it goes by so quick.
Mhm.
And we want to spend every day feeling joy, feeling love. But sometimes we can't do that unless we feel the hard stuff too. And so my life has been filled with lots of grief, but for as many bad days I've had a million and one good days. So
Mhm.
if you're in a tough time, it does not last forever, and the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come. I love
It
that. So I
is.
do have one more question for you because, Love Her is all about the letter to your future self, younger self, current self. So, what is something that you wish your younger self knew about life, love, or self worth, or anything that you would write to her right now? Little Janessa sitting in that room that walked into that house and the chaos and the boy drama and all of it.
I would just let her know that life is not meant to be filled with struggle and
Mhm.
that she doesn't have to do it alone. I am a very independent person, and I feel like I've for so long felt that I just had to strong arm everything and do it alone. But we're meant to live in community. We're meant to have people around us. And
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for Luke and you and Mackenzie and my best friends and our mentor for giving me this community and making me realize that it's not meant to be alone. So I honestly wish I could just hug her and tell her that her best days are yet to come and that she soon is going to have those people that can hold her up better than she can hold herself up.
I love that. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Ness, for sharing your story. I know it's not the easiest thing to unpack all of it, but I think that your story will help so many. And I loved hearing about it because there were so many parts of it, like I said, I didn't know how you were coming
Yeah.
home every day and what you were experiencing. So thank you.
Yes. Always. And to our audience and to Naya, I love you all. Always love her and him, everyone. And I really hope that we could all just step more into vulnerability and being free with who we truly are so that we can embrace one another and we can all just step toward more love, more joy, more peace.
Yes. Thank you guys so, so much for tuning in yet again another week of the Love Her podcasts. Love you
Yes.
guys.
Love you all. Bye.
Love Naya.
Love Janessa.